My name is Madison, I'm 35 years old today, and what I have to tell you will completely change your life. I could be dead now, and I've wanted that for a long time. But after what happened to me on a night of extreme anguish and loneliness, everything changed. I grew up in a Christian home where faith was the foundation of everything. My mother, a woman with a soft voice but firm as a rock, always repeated that the church was our only refuge, a safe haven amid the storms of life. And I believed in her with every fiber of my little being. From an early age, I felt a special warmth when crossing the doors of that simple building with white walls and weathered wooden benches. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of hymns sung in unison filled the air. And there, surrounded by the brothers in the congregation, I felt part of something bigger. Sunday mornings were magical. The sun streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the smiling faces of children running through the hallways, and I was one of them, with a light heart and bare feet dancing on the cold floor. We were happy in that environment, a pure, almost palpable happiness, as if the sky itself came down to embrace us. But in that childish innocence, I could never predict that something dark was lurking, waiting to turn that refuge into a stage for nightmares. Today's testimony will be supernatural, and if you don't want to miss anything, click the subscribe button now and activate the bell so you don't miss anything. The church was not just a place of worship, it was our second home, our private universe. My mother took me by the hand proudly, while I sang the praises that she taught me with so much affection. "God is our shield," she said, and I repeated those words like a mantra, feeling invincible. I remember a specific afternoon when, at the age of 7, I stood on the small stage at the church to sing, "Holy, Holy is the Lord," in front of everyone. My voice was shaking at first, but the gentle looks from my brothers and my mother's encouraging wave gave me courage. When I finished, the applause echoed, and a gray-haired lady, Donna Clara, handed me a homemade dulce de leche, saying that I had the voice of an angel. Those moments were perfect, stitched together with laughter, prayers, and the certainty that we were protected. Even the games had a special touch. We ran around the century-old oak tree in the courtyard, believing it was blessed because it had survived a lightning strike decades before, a story the pastor told with shining eyes. Everything seemed eternal, as if time had made a pact with our joy. But what I didn't know was that even the most sacred places can hide deep shadows, ready to swallow the light. My mother was my guide in that world of faith. She taught me prayers that I recited before going to sleep, with my hands clasped and my knees on the floor beside the bed. "Ask God for protection," she whispered, and I imagined an army of angels surrounding our house, fiery swords drawn. The praises we sang together were like living poetry. "Amazing Grace" was my favorite, and I loved how the melody seemed to float away, washing away any fear. Sometimes she would tell me stories from the Bible in such detail that I could visualize Moses parting the Red Sea or David facing Goliath with his sling. I grew up believing that kindness always won, that love was stronger than anything. In church, this belief was reinforced. The Wednesday services, with emotional testimonies of transformed lives, filled me with hope. Once, a man called Sujuan told how he gave up his addiction after a dream with a heavenly voice, and everyone cried, including me, impressed by the power of faith. It was a perfect setting, a delicate balance between devotion and community. Yet behind that harmony, something terrible was approaching, an event I could never have anticipated, about to shatter everything I knew. Life in that environment was a mosaic of small joys and simple lessons. The children, my inseparable friends, turned every Sunday into an adventure. After the service, we ran to the back of the church, where there was an improvised field, and played ball until the sun went down. My best friend, Anna, said that we were soldiers of Christ, and we invented secret missions to protect the blessed oak from imaginary enemies. I loved listening to the pastor preaching about God's love. With his deep voice that seemed to echo off the walls, he told me fascinating facts, like the fact that the number 7 in the Bible symbolizes perfection, and I, with my childish mind, counted the 7 buttons on my blouse to feel closer to God. My mother reinforced this at home, teaching me to fold my hands in prayer with precision, as if each gesture were sacred. Everything was so perfect, so complete, that I believed nothing could reach us. But what I didn't realize was that perfection is fragile, and that something terrifying was about to break that veil of peace, forever changing the way I saw that refuge. At age 13, a group of girls and I became the church janitors. We stayed up late sweeping the halls, polishing the pews, and organizing the singing books. It was an almost sacred ritual, a way of serving God with dusty hands and a light heart. Back then, I believed we were invisible, just dedicated shadows in a holy place. But someone saw us. Someone watched every movement, every contained laugh, every innocent gesture, and that someone was precisely the person everyone trusted, the pastor. Years later, I discovered that faith can be used like a knife, and that the worst monsters hide behind pulpits. On my 15th birthday, my friends and I had finished cleaning early, and they rushed out, eager for a weekend of freedom. I stayed behind, arranging the last details when the pastor called me with a calm smile. "I need to talk to you, daughter. It's quick." His voice was warm, as always, but there was something behind those words, a thread of electricity that my body sensed before my mind did. He mentioned that he had already informed my mother about my delay, and that calmed me down. After all, who would suspect a man who quoted Bible verses as if he breathed the words of God? But when the office door closed behind me, the click of the lock rang out like a gunshot. The office, once a place of advice and prayer, turned into a nightmare scenario. The pastor started talking about things that didn't make sense. My body, my light, how I was awakening things in him. His fingers trailed up my arm and I froze. The air disappeared. My chest burned, but my feet were glued to the floor as if that red carpet was swallowing me. When he approached, his breath smelled of mint and hypocrisy. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know how to scream. I just knew that something bad was about to happen and that no one would come to save me. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was the crucifix on the wall, swaying slightly, as if even God turned away. What came next was violence disguised as ritual. He called me a temptation, said I had made him sin, as if my 15-year-old body was a walking sin. When it was over, he forcibly knelt me down and placed my head against the floor. "Pray for your forgiveness," he ordered, as he raised his hands, the same ones that minutes before tore me apart. I stammered meaningless words, tears streaming down my nose, salting my lips. The irony was cruel. There in God's house I had been robbed, and I still needed to apologize for it. When he finally released me, I stumbled away, my legs shaking as if the floor was going to collapse. The worst? Nobody noticed. The world continued to spin. The candles still burned on the altar. My pain was invisible. On the way home, every step was agony. My clothes smelled like him, that cheap lavender perfume that now made me nauseous. The streets were empty, and I asked myself, how am I going to look my mother in the eye? How will I get into church again? When I finally arrived, she just said, "How was it in the church line? A lot of work? You will be rewarded by God." The pastor warned that there was a lot of work there. He smiled without knowing that that day my life was destroyed. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and slipped on the floor, hugging my knees. Outside, a strong wind blew at the window, as if the universe was whispering, "Now you know. Wolves wear sheep's clothing." I burst into tears. Those scenes couldn't be erased from my mind. I felt dirty, the worst person in the universe. The next day was a thick fog. I locked myself in the room, huddled under the blanket, as if the fabric could protect me from the outside world. My skin still burned, not from fever, but from an invisible dirt that no shower could wash away. When my mother knocked on the door, her daughter, "Are you okay?" It almost broke what was left of me. I wanted to scream, to throw the truth on the kitchen floor like a broken glass, but the words stuck in my throat. "I'm fine, just tired," I lied, and she accepted, because it was easier to believe in the quiet daughter than in the possibility of a saintly pastor being a predator. Lunch grew cold on the plate, and I watched the shadows from the curtain dance across the wall, wondering if I would ever feel hungry again. The days dragged by like a silent film. I dressed in baggy clothes, as if I could disappear into them. My hair, previously always tied up with care, now fell in oily locks. I didn't have the energy to comb it, much less to care. When my mother insisted we go to church, my legs shook like green sticks. The smell of incense, which had calmed me before, now made me swallow my vomit, and the pastor's voice, echoing in the microphone, was like a knife turning in the wound. I looked at his hands, the same ones that raped me, gesturing over the Bible, and I thought, how come no one sees? How come no one feels evil here? But people smiled, amen, clapped. Their faith was a high wall, and I was on the outside, suffocating. The last straw came on a Sunday night. My mother pulled me to dance during the praise, and I almost fainted when he approached, placing a hand on my shoulder as if it were a gesture of blessing. In that second, something inside me snapped. I got home, sat on the bathroom floor, and leaned my forehead against the cold wall. I needed to tell. Even though I'm afraid, even though I know that the world prefers to protect monsters rather than believe in victims. When my mother came into my room later, I blurted out the truth in garbled sentences, as if I were ripping pieces out of myself. He touched me. He did things. And then the silence as my tears flowed, waiting for her reaction. More to my despair and horror, my mother was silent for a moment, and what she said to me next was even more terrible. Her face changed, not to horror, but to something worse, disbelief. Are you sure about this? Do you have any idea what this will do to the pastor's image? You're going to destroy his family, ours. Do you understand the scandal? Her words fell like bricks. She didn't even ask me if I was okay. She just turned her back, and at that moment I understood. I was completely alone. The rejection hurt more than the violence, because the pastor was a devil, but my mother was my mother. She was the one who taught me how to pray, who took me to church as a safe place. And now she chose his side. That night I bent over the prayer notebook she had given me for my first communion and tore out page by page. The altar candles at home were still lit, and I snuffed them out with my fingers, watching the smoke rise as a last cry for help. Outside, a dog howled, and I wondered if he too was trapped in a nightmare. When I went to bed, I covered the mirror with a sheet. I couldn't bear to see my own face any longer. The girl from before had died in that room, and no one noticed the silent funeral that was happening inside me. But what would happen next would take me to the deepest black hole. If you have experienced something similar and carried this pain alone, write here in the comments. I also had my silence ignored. You don't need to expose yourself. But this small gesture could be the first step towards your healing, and perhaps towards the healing of someone who will read it and understand that they are no longer alone. I died inside. I started to hate my mother and everyone around me. I wanted her to disappear. And inside, I started to want to disappear too, so I wouldn't have to see anyone else from that place. The years dragged by like an endless sentence. The pain that began as a deafening scream inside me turned into something quieter, denser, a depression that weighed like lead in my bones. Waking up was an effort. Breathing was a burden. I saw myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the empty-eyed person staring back at me. I stopped attending church. My family, the world, everything seemed to spin while I stood in the same place, sinking deeper and deeper into an invisible swamp. My mother no longer insisted that I go to services. Perhaps she preferred my absence to the embarrassment of a daughter who could no longer pretend to be devout. Loose clothes became my armor, silence my main language. And at the bottom of that well, an idea began to grow, slow and relentless, that I didn't need to exist. At 18, the desire to disappear became a plan. It wasn't an impulse, it was a cold calculation, the only logical solution to a pain that had no end. That night, I waited for the house to fall asleep. The clock in the living room said 2:17 when I stood up, my body driven by a determination I hadn't felt in years. The bathroom was small, cold, the white tile reflecting the dim light from the lamp. I turned on the sound on my cell phone, some music just to drown out the noise of the world outside. My hands didn't shake when I picked up the blade. In fact, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I had control over something. The first cut was softer than I had imagined, a red streak that appeared like a sigh on the skin. The pain was sharp, but almost welcome. A pain that I could understand, that made sense. The blood ran in dark threads, mixing with the water in the sink, and I watched, fascinated, as it made ephemeral patterns before disappearing down the drain. As weakness began to set in, I slowly slid to the floor. The cold tile against my skin reminded me of that night in the pastor's office, the same feeling of helplessness, of cold that came from within. But this time I thought I was in charge. I closed my eyes and tried to pray, but the words didn't come. Instead, it came. The sound of music began to grow distant, as if someone was gradually turning down the volume of the world. My vision darkened at the edges. Suddenly, it was as if an invisible thread broke inside me. I felt a sudden pull, and from one moment to the next I was no longer inside my body. I floated above the scene, taking in everything with unearthly clarity, my mother banging frantically on the bathroom door, the veins in her neck bulging with panic, my father running with tense shoulders, preparing to pry open the cracked wood. I tried to scream at them, but my voice was gone. It was then that a dark vortex opened up behind me, like a tear in the air itself, and before I could react, hands made of shadow grabbed me tightly. The last I saw was the inert body on the bathroom floor, pink water running around her wrist, and then darkness. The place I was dragged to was neither hell nor heaven. It was something worse. Rusty iron doors, tall as towers, creaked open, revealing a living nightmare scenario. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and burning flesh, but the pain I felt wasn't coming from my body. It was as if my soul was being ripped apart, strand by strand. All around me, figures writhed in silent agony, and their screams echoed straight into my mind without needing sound. Then, in the midst of that darkness, I recognized a face, the pastor. He was there, but not as a victim. He was standing, smiling, as a creature made of darkness whispered in his ear, its black claws wrapped around his neck like a necklace of possession. And I understood, in a flash of horror, evil wasn't just something he did. It was something that inhabited him. The vision expanded like a nightmare within another Pesnadero. I saw scenes that made me shudder. The same pastor, years before, on his knees in a circle of black candles, offering something in exchange for power. I saw how shadows infiltrated churches, not through dark corners, but through the sweet words of false devotees. They whispered lies, fed vanities, transformed faith into fanaticism and love into hate. And then, as if a veil had been pulled from my eyes, I saw myself. Inside my chest there was a black tree, its roots sunk into each trauma, each rejection, each time I was called a liar. Its branches were twisted, full of thorns, and the flowers that sprouted were not flowers at all. They were petal-shaped scars. That tree was the hate I didn't know I carried, and when it fully blossomed, it was at that moment that I picked up the blade. The revelation came as a blow. I hadn't tried to die out of weakness. I had been driven to it. Every unspoken word, every look that doubted me, every time my suffering was swept under the rug of convenience, everything watered that tree. And now, in the limbo between life and death, I saw the stark truth. Evil didn't need horned demons when it had humans willing to do its work. The shadows around the shepherd laughed, a soundless laugh that echoed in my soul, and I finally understood the game. They didn't want me dead. They wanted my hopelessness. They wanted me to give up. But something about that understanding lit a fire inside me, even there, in that lightless place. And that's when I heard a voice, different from all the others, gentle, but impossible to ignore. This testimony is awakening something inside you. Pain, truth, or even liberation. Leave a like now. It may seem like a simple gesture, but this is how this message reaches those who need it most, and it can save someone who is still in the dark. I felt a hand, huge, warm, that radiated a strength that was not of this world, grabbed mine firmly. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a decisive gesture, like someone snatching someone from the jaws of death without asking permission. Before I could understand, I felt a violent pull upward, as if I were being pulled from a pit of tar. The sulfur smell suddenly dissipated, replaced by a fresh scent, like the first rain after a scorching summer. And then, light. A golden explosion that closed my eyes involuntarily, but it didn't hurt. On the contrary, it was like diving into warm water after years of shivering in the cold. When my eyes adjusted, the scenery was so simple, it almost made me cry. An infinite field of white and yellow daisies, dancing to the rhythm of a breeze that seemed made just to caress my skin. The sky was that impossible blue, the kind that only exists in childhood memories, before the world taught us to distrust beauty. And the silence. It wasn't an empty silence, but complete, as if finally all the voices that screamed inside my head had fallen silent. For the first time since that night in the pastor's office, my body wasn't tense, my chest didn't hurt, and the fear, that constant companion, had simply evaporated. I took a deep breath and the air didn't feel heavy in my lungs. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. The light around me wasn't from the sun, it was from him. There was no clear shape, no religious figure painted in stained glass, just a presence that I recognized instantly, as if my soul knew something that my mind had taken years to doubt. Jesus. The name echoed inside me without me having to say it, and a wave of emotion knocked me to my knees among the flowers. But he didn't want my reverence, he wanted my joy. I felt an irresistible urge to run, like a child finally letting go of their parents' hand in the park, and I ran, with my arms open, feeling the wind play with my hair, my bare feet sinking into the soft earth. Something miraculous happened at every step. My body changed, not in the mirror, but in essence. With every daisy I passed, a piece of my childhood came back. Little by little, I was no longer the 18-year-old girl marked by pain, but the 8-year-old girl who loved drawing with chalk in the backyard, the 12-year-old who laughed until her stomach hurt with her friends, the 15-year-old who still believed in love. The good memories, the ones that the trauma had erased, came back in vivid flashes. The smell of Grandma's birthday cake, the feeling of the cold sand on my feet the first time I saw the sea, the pride in my father's eyes when I recited a poem at school. It was as if he was giving me back every stolen fragment, piecing together my story with golden threads. When I stopped running, I was 16 again, not in appearance but in soul, the age when everything had fallen apart. I felt something warm run down my face, and I brought my hand to my face expecting to find tears. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief, like when a broken bone finally heals after years of being poorly glued together. I looked at my hands expecting to see the scars I had made myself, but the skin was smooth, as if the marks had never existed. And then came the strongest realization of all. The pain was gone. Not just the physical pain, but that other one, the one that lived in the dark corners of my chest, the one that told me I was dirty, broken, unworthy. The weight I carried for years just disappeared, like a backpack full of rocks that someone takes off your back without you noticing. He didn't need to say a word. I knew in the deepest place of my being that I was healed. Not in the way the TV preachers promise with screams and dramatic falls, but in a way so intimate and complete that it seemed as if the wound had never existed. The flowers around me swayed, and I swear I heard laughter in the wind. Not mockery, but the kind of pure joy that makes you smile without knowing why. It was then that I realized I wasn't dead, and this was not a vision of heaven. It was a gift, a glimpse of what was always available to me, even on the darkest of days. A reminder that evil may have marked me, but it did not define me, and that no matter how much men had failed me, his love had never gone away. I was the one who had stopped seeing it. Have you ever had a moment when you felt like God was holding your hand, even when no one else saw? Maybe it was a song that touched you, a silent hug, or a sunset that seemed to speak to you. Comment here. I felt it. The return to consciousness was slow, like emerging from a deep dream. First came the antiseptic smell of the hospital, then the dull pain in my bandaged wrists, and finally the weight of my mother's hand holding mine with desperate strength. When I opened my eyes, she was there, her face swollen from crying, her eyes as red as mine had been so many times. "I'm sorry," was the first word that came out of my mouth, hoarse from disuse, but she just shook her head, the tears flowing faster. "I'm the one who asks for forgiveness, my daughter," she whispered, and at that moment something inside me broke loose. The hatred I carried for years, that knot of anger that suffocated me every time I remembered how she didn't believe me, simply dissolved. I now saw the truth. My mother was not my enemy. She too had been a victim, not at his hands, but of a system that teaches women to doubt each other, that worships men in pulpits while whispering, "Don't cause a scandal." The hug that came next was the first real one in years. She wrapped me carefully, avoiding my bruised wrists, but with an intensity that said 1,000 words. Her body shook against mine, and I realized how broken she was too, only no one had ever given her permission to fall. When we parted, she looked into my eyes and asked the question that would change everything. "What do you need, daughter?" And for once, I didn't lie. "I need to go to the police station." There was no hesitation, no attempt to convince me to let it go for the sake of the family, just a firm nod, and then she was helping me up, calling the nurse, asking for discharge against medical advice. While she was on the phone with my dad, I looked out the window. The morning sun came in without asking permission, lighting up the hospital floor as if the whole world was telling me, "It's time." The police station was colder than I had imagined. The air conditioning was blowing hard, but what gave me chills was the silence that fell when we entered. 2 police officers exchanged looks when I said the pastor's name, and for a moment, my heart sank. They wouldn't believe me either. But then a delegate, a woman in her 40s with tired but kind eyes, pulled me into a private room. "Tell everything," she said, placing a recorder on the table, and I did. Every detail, every dirty word he whispered, every time I pretended to forget just to survive. My voice shook but didn't break, because this time, my mother was at my side, holding my hand as if her very life depended on it. When I finished, the deputy took a deep breath. "You're not the first," she confessed, and at that moment something in her gaze changed. It was as if the professional gave way to the woman who knew exactly what I was talking about. The news spread like wildfire. The next day, while I was still at home recovering, my mother answered the first phone call. It was a woman from church asking if she could talk. That week, 7 other girls and women showed up. Some with recent stories, others with scars as old as mine. The pastor denied it, of course. In front of the cameras, he cried, quoted verses, called everything persecution by the enemy. But by the time police came to find him, he had already fled, leaving behind a laptop full of compromising photos and a diary detailing years of abuse. They found him 3 days later, hiding in a relative's house, trying to disguise himself with sunglasses and a ridiculous hat. The image of him being handcuffed went around the country, and for a while, I was the center of a media storm. Reporters knocked on our door, religious leaders gave fiery speeches, and the church that had once rejected me was now forced to face its demons. But in the midst of the chaos, I was at peace, because finally, after so many years, the truth no longer weighed solely on my shoulders. The trial was quick, but nothing was easy. Seeing him in the dock, still trying to maintain the pose of a pious man, made my stomach turn. But this time, when the tears came, they weren't from fear, they were from relief. Because I looked around and saw other women, some I knew from childhood, others complete strangers, all united by a secret that was no longer our burden. When the sentence was handed down, 22 years in prison, there was no celebration, just a solemn silence. We left the forum in a line, each carrying our own pain, but also something new. The hope that maybe, just maybe, our courage would prevent another girl from going through the same hell. That night, my mother and I sat in the garden, looking at the stars. She didn't say anything, just held my hand, the same hand that she once didn't believe in, but that was now saving others. And I finally understood. Evil may plant its seeds in the shadows, but it is in the light that healing grows. Have you ever helped someone just by being there? Maybe with a word, a hug, or even just listening without judging? Comment here, I was there for someone. Your comment can show other people that light exists, and that good also multiplies, just as pain spreads in silence. Months later, I went back to studying. I graduated in psychology. I specialized in child sexuality. Going back to school was like rebuilding my mind brick by brick. Every psychology book I opened, every child development class I attended, was a step towards transforming my pain into purpose. In the university chairs, I was no longer the victim. I was the student who knew, firsthand, why those theories mattered. When I got to the topic of child sexual abuse, my palms were sweating, but I didn't look away. On the contrary, I delved deeply into the articles, the research, the intervention techniques. My teachers said I had a gift for working with traumatized children. They didn't know that that gift had been forged in the fires of personal hell. On graduation day, when I received my psychology diploma, my mother cried at the back of the auditorium, and this time they were tears of pride. Specializing in child sexuality was not a professional choice. It was a calling. In internships at clinics and schools, I developed a relentless radar for the signs that most ignore. The girl who suddenly stopped drawing people, the boy who has nightmares that are too specific for his age, the child who knows sexual terms he should never know. Once, in a municipal school, a 7-year-old girl showed me a drawing of a tall figure with huge hands. "It's the uncle from the Bible school," she said, with a naturalness that chilled my spine. That night, I contacted the Guardianship Council personally without waiting for bureaucracy. When the case came to light weeks later, the director thanked me with tears in her eyes. "How did you know?" I just responded, "Because I was once that kid." My schedule today is divided between the office and activism. In lectures for parents in schools, I teach the secret language of abused children, that way in which a "I don't like uncle" said with hunched shoulders can be a cry for help. For mothers, I show them simple questions like, "What don't you like being done to your body?" They can open doors that orders like, "Tell me if someone touches you," would never reach. And in the churches that invite me, I speak without fear and warn everyone that 47% of abusers are family acquaintances, 30% are leaders or teachers, and the majority are not the monsters on TV. They are the charismatic guy that everyone loves. My audience is always silent when I show the slide with the signs, sudden changes in behavior, inexplicable fear of certain places, regression to childish behavior. And then I tell my story, without hate, but without hiding. I also went back to attending church and being intimate with God, because I learned that it was not God who hurt me, but a human. This work taught me that evil doesn't wear a uniform. I've seen abusers in suits, in doctors' coats, in teachers' uniforms, and even in construction overalls. The common denominator is never the profession, but the strategy. They isolate, manipulate, and then silence. That's why I insist. This testimony is not about demonizing churches, but about opening eyes. A mother once asked me, "But how can you trust someone?" I replied, "It's not about distrusting everyone. It's about creating spaces where your daughter knows she can say anything." I showed her how to make simple arrangements. If someone asks you to keep a secret from your parents, even if it's about a special gift, will you tell me? That's our golden rule. The woman left the session different, and I knew she had just broken a possible chain. There are days when the weight of the stories I hear almost knocks me down. When I see a teenager who cuts off her own arms because she thinks she deserves the pain, or a boy who believes he is disgusting because of things his uncle did to him, I have to lock myself in the bathroom and cry. But then, I remember that vision in the field of daisies, the peace I felt as the light enveloped me, and I returned to the room with a new purpose, to be the adult for these children that I needed and didn't have. There is a cure. I am living proof. It's not magic. It's not instantaneous, but it happens. In the small moments, when a patient who hasn't smiled in months laughs at a silly joke, when a boy draws his family without monsters for the first time, when a mother texts me saying, "She finally told me." If there's one thing I carry as a flag, it's this. Silence is abuse's greatest ally. That's why I speak, write, scream if necessary. Not for revenge, but for justice. And for love. For this 15-year-old girl who one day thought death was the only way out, and for all the others who are still there, locked in their secrets. Because I know, like few others, that no matter how thick the darkness, a single lit candle can begin to light the way back. And that with time, support, and a lot of courage, even the deepest wounds can turn into scars, not as marks of defeat, but as reminders that the light has won. If you believe that testimonies like this need to be heard, and that no child should suffer in silence any longer, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. Here pain becomes healing, and the truth finds a voice. Perhaps this testimony has come to you at the exact moment when a child nearby is giving silent signs, that way of shrugging his shoulders when a certain uncle approaches, the recurring nightmares that you attribute to fertile imagination, or that sudden change in school performance that the teacher insists is a phase. I beg you, do not underestimate these details. Research reveals that only 10% of abuse cases are reported. The other 90% hide behind phrases such as, "Children make things up," or "better not get involved." But what if it was your daughter, your brother, the boy in the building who always looks scared? Silence is the fertile ground where predators cultivate their crimes, and each of us has the power and duty to uproot these weeds. Look beyond the obvious. Abused children rarely arrive crying with marks on their bodies. They know intuitively that danger often wears the clothes of good people. But your body speaks a language that we need to learn. The girl who stopped jumping rope because it hurts down there. The boy who is inexplicably terrified of the school bathroom. The teenager who started dressing like a boy in the unconscious hope of becoming invisible to predatory eyes. These are silent cries, and our mission is to translate them. So a simple technique that I teach in lectures: draw pictures with your children regularly. Ask them to represent their family, school, church. Traumatized children often draw authority figures with disproportionately large hands or sharp teeth. Their subconscious is delivering what words cannot yet. Protect by creating bridges, not walls. And believe me, God wants to write a new story for your life. That's why I want to pray for you now. If you can, close your eyes. Lord Jesus, heal now every wounded heart that is listening to this story. Show that your love is greater than any pain. Free those who are still trapped in hate, in shame, in hurt. And with each testimony, He creates a seed of hope. Amen. If this testimony spoke to your heart, click now on the video that is playing here on the screen, and it is a powerful testimony that will leave an impact on you.